Today, terrorism has changed the way warfare is waged against America. Instead of the conventional weapons of the army of an enemy nation, we are now threatened by handfuls of individuals with weapons of mass destruction. The high numbers of people they can impact in a short amount of time can easily overwhelm the medical facilities in our communities. With doctors and nurses forced to focus on the worst cases, they will be unable to care for the masses of victims. The trend of the last decade is for medical facilities to downsize, to become more efficient. Therefore, a city's ability to care for a sudden influx of new patients is seriously limited. If the terrorists use a weapon of mass destruction in a city, the surge of casualties would be devastating. Tens of thousands of victims would quickly exhaust the medical capacity of any large city. In a large-scale attack, we wouldn't even have 5% of the medical personnel needed. The medical resources in most cities would be overwhelmed with just a few hundred unexpected cases. Those with medical knowledge would be critically needed to join in the effort of caring for the victims. That's why the pharmacist's role will change in a terrorist attack.
Well, my concern as a pharmacist is that a plan hasn't been formulated and practiced to distribute medications to a great number of people. That chaos would result if the plan were not clearly formulated and practiced.
Well, I want to know who's going to bring me these thousands of medications and how I'm going to have to handle them to make it practical to hand them out to the people who need them.
If there is a disaster, who's in charge? Who should I call?
My concern would be my patients that I have now, how to handle those patients that need their daily medications versus going out to respond to the need for pharmacists to go out in the field, and who would coordinate it, and where my time would be more important, or how to balance it all.
Well, I think my biggest question would be, what do they really need me to do? Do they need me to fill prescriptions for patients, or to provide some sort of emergency drug service, or to triage patients to find out who needs to see somebody more than a pharmacist, or who needs some further form of care? What do they really need me to do?
Hello, I'm Cham Dallas, professor in the College of Pharmacy and director of the toxicology program at the University of Georgia. I'm also director of the Centers for Disease Control Specialty Center in Public Health Preparedness, with a focus in pharmacy preparedness for responding to weapons of mass destruction. This video is intended to initiate preparedness for the pharmacist for their participation in the medical response to nuclear, biological, chemical, and radiological attacks in the homeland. You will be acquainted with the current threats, what the critical role of the pharmacist will be, and what you should do to prepare for attacks using weapons of mass destruction. Pharmacists are on the front lines as information gatherers in their community. They need to be alert to trends and know how to communicate with the health authorities in their area.
Hi, Miss Smith. How are you today?
I'm fine. How are you?
All righty. Oh, my goodness. We'll have this ready in about 15 minutes for you, okay? Henry. That's our 18th prescription for Cipro today. If this keeps up, we're going to run out.
Something's going on. Maybe we ought to call the county health department and see what's happening.
Well, how do you do that?
I don't know, 911, I'm not sure. Let me look them up in here. We'll call, what about, doesn't Ron Hart work there?
Yeah, Ron Hart works out there.
Pharmacists can form the early warning team that spots the medical problems as they develop. After a domestic terrorist incident, the public will naturally come to their local pharmacy where they always get their medicine.
You're taking one twice a day for 7 days. And
Hey, do you have Cipro? We need it. They're out at City Drugs. I need my Cipro.
just a minute now. Just a minute. We need just a minute. Y'all must give us a little bit of time. We got prescriptions for you.
If there is no response plan in place and no reserve pharmaceutical supplies, then the local pharmacy will be overrun with frustrated and frightened customers. What are the most likely chemical, biological, nuclear, or radiological agents to be used against us by terrorists? With the collapse of the Soviet Union, there is a lot of legitimate concern about the enormous stockpile of weapons of mass destruction there, and for the thousands of weapons experts that they trained. A lot of nations have developed these weapons now, and a wide array of political, religious, and other private groups are committed to obtaining and using these weapons to produce mass casualties here in America. It's a familiar theme now that we are hearing from the most authoritative scientific and governmental sources. It's not a matter of if, but when these agents will be used in the United States. Over the past 100 years, chemical weapons have killed many thousands of people, ranging from soldiers in the trenches in World War I to the recent mass murder of women and children in Iraq by Saddam Hussein. Our primary concern in domestic terrorism attacks is not from airplane bombs or artillery shells, as occurred in those attacks, but from more conventional approaches. Can you imagine the havoc that a single terrorist could cause in a football stadium crowded with 80,000 people if he had a chemical agent and a simple garden sprayer? The key element in a chemical weapon attack would be the generation of an aerosol of that agent that would be inhaled by its victims. Thousands of these victims could be expected to descend upon the pharmacies and the healthcare system in desperate need of medicines for life-threatening lung injuries and burns of the skin and eyes and the infections that would be caused by them. This would create a medical crisis that would overwhelm our current capacity to treat chemical casualties. While millions die from the normal occurrence of disease, the use of biological agents in warfare is limited relative to chemical and nuclear weapons. Still, the potential for mass casualties from a technically efficient biological weapon attack is staggering. In one exercise, where there was a simulated biological weapon release, the disease spread rapidly to over 300,000 people. In order to have contained it, they calculated that they would have needed 11,000 inoculators. Pharmacists can fill this gap in the critical juncture at the front line of defense against biological weapons. It would be relatively easy to introduce a biological toxin into the food supply, such as a terrorist using a hand sprayer in a local salad bar. This actually happened in Oregon, where an Eastern cult introduced salmonella into salad bars and made over 270 people sick. Victims wouldn't show symptoms for hours or even days, while the terrorist escapes to conduct more attacks elsewhere. In the case of a communicable disease, the disease would spread far beyond the initial point of contact. With an appropriate medical response, aided by pharmacists, we could contain these biological weapon outbreaks and spare many people this horror. If we do not contain them, the number of eventual victims would exceed even that of a nuclear weapon. The most devastating effect of any weapon of mass destruction would result from a nuclear detonation, particularly in a highly populated urban area. A medium-sized nuclear weapon would be expected to kill hundreds of thousands of people and severely injure hundreds of thousands more. Following the destruction of the city by the nuclear blast and fireball, radioactive fallout would spread hundreds of miles downwind. All of this devastation would result from a relatively small amount of weapons-grade nuclear material, usually a plutonium core surrounded by explosives that would force the plutonium in on itself, causing the chain reaction and nuclear detonation. Even though thousands of nuclear missiles and bombs have been decommissioned, the plutonium and uranium cores that look like this have not been destroyed. Thousands of these cores are in storage in Russia, for instance, which is of great concern to those of us committed to preventing them from falling in the hands of people that will use them. Pharmacists will play a major role in the medical response to nuclear attack, particularly in the early phases of the event, when potassium iodide tablets have to be distributed to prevent thyroid cancer resulting from radioactive iodine exposure. If pharmacists can get the tablets out to people within 4 hours of the event, or at the most within 12 hours, the subsequent high incidence of thyroid cancer could be almost completely prevented. We've all been warned to be on the alert for suspicious packages. What if one of these turned out to actually have a bomb that had radioactive materials encased around the explosives? This would be the dreaded dirty bomb that we've been hearing so much press about. While the potential hazard from a dirty bomb attack is much less than that from nuclear, chemical, or biological agents, there has been considerable interest recently in dirty bomb or radiological weapons by potential terrorists. These attacks involve distributing radioactive materials so that people contact them, but there is no enormous devastating explosion as one sees with a nuclear weapon. What would happen if one went off in a public place? The radioactive cloud will contaminate people and property near the blast, in addition to the casualties that would result from the conventional explosive. People jump to outrageous conclusions when they hear the word radiation. I would hate to see what would happen to the property values in areas where a dirty bomb was used. The actual hazard from this form of radioactivity is liable to be very low, since a conventional explosion is not likely to produce particles small enough to be inhaled into the lung. Also, people will simply leave the area quickly, particularly when they find out that radiation is involved. Decontamination would further eliminate the relatively low risk. Pharmacists would play a key role in patient counseling and calming irrational fears. These substances have been called the poor man's atomic bomb, so you don't need to be a powerful nation to have these weapons. Even graduate students can formulate these substances in a college laboratory, so the likelihood of their use is much higher than an attack by an invading army. Every community needs to form their own Emergency Management Association. This is a volunteer organization that meets in advance of a crisis and plans how the medical and community resources would be deployed in a mass casualty event. The EMA should include representatives from city management, county public health, local hospitals, ambulance companies, fire, police, local military, and other first responders in the community. Pharmacists need to get involved in their local EMA because they are critical in the distribution of medications that may be needed to care for the multitude of victims. The EMA will meet in advance and divide up the city into areas of responsibility. It would only add to the chaos if 12 different agencies arrive at an incident and they all announce that they are the one in charge. This networking is critical in advance of an incident, so you have the names, numbers, and radio frequencies of the other parties involved. Once the local EMA is formed, your area can receive assistance through the Strategic National Stockpile. In an event with weapons of mass destruction, the state and local emergency response teams must act quickly to protect the public. It's likely you will run out of the local supply of drugs and medical supplies you'll need. Hundreds of thousands of doses of medication and medical supplies are in storage and ready to ship to assist any area of the country within 12 hours of the call. Shipments will continue to be delivered until the need is met and the crisis is contained. With a mass casualty event, the local, state, and federal officials will evaluate the incident and your ability to respond in order to decide if the stockpile should be deployed. The Department of Homeland Security will issue the official order to release the assets of the Strategic National Stockpile. The local EMA will receive and manage the supply of critically needed medicines in the community during the crisis. A staff of 5 to 7 from the Technical Advisory Response Unit associated with the stockpile will be on hand to support the EMA with technical assistance during the emergency. The stockpile crates contain a variety of drugs and materials, including oral medicines, antitoxins, chemical antidotes, vaccines, medical equipment and supplies, as well as airway management equipment. Each of the containers has transparent Lexan panels on the outside to make it easy to see the contents of the crate. More delicate substances that require refrigeration come in portable battery-operated cooling units. Temperature monitoring devices are included for vaccines, such as those for smallpox, which require controlled temperatures. The package contains Category 2 and 4 controlled substances, such as lorazepam, diazepam, and morphine, which are transported in wire mesh security containers to comply with drug enforcement requirements. As the terrorist threats change over time, the push package will continue to be updated with supplies for the appropriate medical response. As you can see, the crates are designed to fit into the shape of a cargo plane for rapid transport. They also fit into 7 tractor trailers for ground transportation. If the threat is unknown, a push package is immediately sent, which contains a broad range of drugs and supplies. Once the terrorist agent used in the crisis is more clearly defined, follow-up shipments will be sent to treat the specific medical needs caused by that agent. The pharmaceuticals come in prepackaged 10-day regimens of oral antibiotics in childproof labeled bottles. This will supply several 100,000 people who have possibly been exposed to a biological agent. The children's dosages come in chewable tablets in liquid form. To maximize efficiency, most oral medications come in unit of use packaging. Some repackaging may be necessary for additional dosages or if the agent used has a biological resistance to the medication. Your local EMA needs to recruit and train volunteers who can break down bulk drugs. 2 industrial high-speed packaging machines are included, which can package and label over 2,000 regimens per machine per hour. There are also 8 tablet counting machines and 100 handheld volumetric counting devices included for backup. Who will repackage these medications? Firemen, police, or the National Guard? Pharmacists in the community are the best equipped to perform this critical task. They already have all the skills and the ethical understanding to perform this role to high standards. The exterior color labels on each crate divide the push package into 5 different categories of medical items, so you can quickly locate and dispense the urgently needed supplies. A document pouch on the outside of the container holds a detailed list and a packing diagram to help you identify the contents. The supplies will need to be apportioned for each of the locations that are treating patients, and the stockpile staff will strategize with you on how best to do that. The local EMA will need to distribute and dispense the medications in an efficient manner. Planning and training is needed in advance, so this will run smoothly in a crisis. Dispensing sites and crowd flow need to be designed in advance to avoid chaos. Although this has not been the traditional role of a pharmacist in the past, it is one that uses their unique skills during a time of crisis in the community. The pharmacist can contribute in other non-traditional roles, performing critical tasks in the medical response. If a biological agent is used, mass inoculations will be a major part of the medical response to halt the spread of the disease. Community centers will need to be set up for thousands of people to receive their injections. But who's equipped to administer these medicines? A team of pharmacists volunteering their service can meet the need for trained inoculations. With their knowledge of proper record keeping, handling syringes, and administering proper dosages, pharmacists are uniquely qualified to serve their community in these times of crisis. The terrorist objective is to produce the maximum victims at one time. If a weapon of mass destruction is used, there are likely to be thousands of people who need varying levels of medical support. The doctors and nurses will be in the hospital straining to care for the victims as quickly as they come in. With the medical background of the pharmacists, they are the best volunteers in the community to meet the needs of this surge of patients. They can assist by performing triage. By checking vital signs and symptoms, they can assess who gets medical care, who needs urgent medical care, who can wait for care, and who are the worried well, who just need information and reassurance. Patient counseling is one of the fundamental tenets of the pharmaceutical profession. But in a mass casualty environment, due to the sheer numbers of victims, the pharmacist will just be unable to spend enough time in normal patient counseling in order to perform the priority task of triage and mass pharmaceutical distribution. In the past, our nation has responded with mass media patient counseling. After 9/11, there were high visibility memorial events with a variety of religious leaders and government officials that served the purpose of mass patient counseling. This is not only for the genuine victims and their families, but also for the vast number of worried well.
We ask Almighty God to watch over our nation. We pray that He will comfort and console those who now walk in sorrow. We thank Him for each life we now must mourn and the promise of a life to come. As we've been assured, neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth can separate us from God's love. May He bless the souls of the departed. May He comfort our own. And and may he always guide our country. God bless America.
Millions of Americans were shocked by the events of 9/11, and they turned their TVs for information and facts to calm their fears and give them the comfort that is so vital to maintaining public order.
Ms. Tan,
Yes.
I have your prescription ready for you again.
After the initial surge, the pharmacists will return to their traditional role of patient counseling to educate and reassure the patient with follow-up dosages and comforting the patient that the medication will indeed do its job. The pharmacist will need to answer the rumors and myths that will circulate from bad media reports, as well as old Hollywood images about the effects of these weapons. All of us have embedded in our minds the movie fantasies of huge mutated beasts and out-of-control birth defects due to radiation exposure. It is essential that pharmacists and other healthcare providers use accurate patient counseling under the trying conditions of these kinds of crises. For instance, when I worked in Chernobyl, in the aftermath of that nuclear accident, 30,000 pregnant women aborted babies that they had originally intended to carry to birth. Their decisions were based solely on patient counseling that said they would have radiation-induced birth defects. The truth is, however, that for the 60,000 women from the highly contaminated areas that did carry their babies to birth, there were no statistically significant increases in birth defects. In fact, there were no increased birth defects after the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bomb attacks either. Therefore, the thousands of pregnancies that were terminated were based on inaccurate patient counseling. Pharmacists can make an enormous contribution to large-scale medical response using valid, scientifically accurate patient counseling. With the appropriate training, pharmacists will take their place alongside the other healthcare providers in a crisis involving weapons of mass destruction. The American Medical Association is offering the Basic Disaster Life Support Curricula, or BDLS, which has been produced through the Centers for Disease Control. The BDLS is a one-day classroom curricula to prepare physicians, nurses, pharmacists, and other public health practitioners for the medical response to weapons of mass destruction. The BDLS will be offered in all 50 states soon by the American Medical Association through special symposia, web-based instruction, videos like this one, and print-based materials. Follow-up instruction would include the Advanced Disaster Life Support, or ADLS, curricula, which would include hands-on training with detection devices, protective equipment, decontamination exercises, and simulations with high-fidelity disaster simulators. It is important to get this training in advance of a crisis to minimize chaos if there is an incident. It is clear that pharmacists will play a major role in the medical response in domestic terrorism attacks using weapons of mass destruction. In some key facets of that response, such as the distribution of iodide tablets to prevent thyroid cancer after a nuclear attack, pharmacists may indeed play the primary role in a successful response. Of course, pharmacists will be critical in their traditional role in distributing life-saving medicines in the immediate and long-term follow-up to a disaster. Following nuclear, chemical, biological, or radiological terrorist attacks, pharmacists will be involved in massive coordinated distributions from the National Pharmaceutical Stockpile. Please, it's very important that you find your local emergency preparedness group and fulfill the most appropriate role for you in an emergency. In addition, it's highly likely that pharmacists will be included in new non-traditional roles or in an extension of an existing role in large-scale immunizations, assisting physicians and nurses in the triage of mass casualties and in patient counseling. Every dramatic time in history has a certain segment of the population that really makes the difference between victory and defeat. In the coming crisis, it's going to be the properly prepared healthcare responder that will be on the front lines, that top 1% of the population that will really make the difference. Therefore, be alert, volunteer, get acquainted with your local emergency response people, and get the training that you will need to prepare for these events. And you, the pharmacist, will be in that top 1% that really makes the difference.